So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Core Ledger webinar. My name is Samuel Miller. I work with the marketing and sales teams here at Core Ledger, and I'll be emceeing today's event. This is the third in our webinar series that's designed to encourage real discussions about blockchain technology, its adoption, and the industry at large. DeFi in particular is a topic that is timely and relevant and extremely important for anyone who's currently looking at crypto or blockchain or working with it to understand. If you have attended past Core Ledger webinars, then today's agenda will look very familiar. In just a second, Core Ledger's co-founder and CEO, Hannes Pfeiffer, will start the presentation by discussing what DeFi actually is, which, as we'll find out, is surprisingly complicated. Then we'll take a look at the largely negative consequences that DeFi is having for the crypto and blockchain spaces. And finally, we'll talk about the impact all this will have on the industry down the road. After that, we'll have some time for discussion. So if you have any questions, comments, or discussion points, you'll see a Q&A button on the left side of your screen. If you just click on that, you can type your questions in, and at the end, we'll do our best to answer them. So I know there's a lot to cover today. Without any further ado from my side, I will pass the mic off to Hannes.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Well, just a few words about myself. My name is Johannes Schweifer. I'm actually a chemist. I started my career as a consultant, and in 2013, after starting with blockchain in 2011 and buying first Bitcoins at that time at a very modest price of €4, I co-founded Bitcoin Swiss together with 3 other people. And in 2017, I co-founded Core Ledger, where we provide token economy solutions and blockchain technology in general to fuel business processes. So let us start with today's topic, DeFi. What's this? DeFi is actually first defined by its opposite, which is CeFi, centralized finance. In a centralized finance model, and this is the model as is today and still prevalent, where you have a centralized organization, some institution, maybe a financial institution, may be regulated, through which all traffic and all transactions have to pass. In opposite to this, there is the decentralized finance, DeFi. In a DeFi environment, transactions go directly from peer-to-peer, from one party to another party. So there are different business models which are supported by this. So one of this, and one of the most famous ones in the last and latest months and last year, has become the peer-to-peer lending model. Then, of course, exchanging values in a decentralized manner. Decentralized exchanges, so-called DEXs, have appeared. Then, of course, all kinds of fundraising and funding models, which are older than the recent DeFi hype. Frankly speaking, the term DeFi has been coined just in the last couple of years. Various forms of payments, of course, gaming and gambling, and some methods in the prediction market, which by itself are gambling or forms of gambling. So to put it in a nutshell, DeFi, decentralized finance, allows actors to transact directly with each other. That is called peer-to-peer, without needing any intermediary. That's the theory. In practice, there's always some form of intermediary, and the most simple one is a smart contract or the blockchain itself. Due to the fact that it's governed by mathematics alone, it's not considered an intermediary which can have any influence, but bugs in that software, bugs in that system which bend the mathematics in some form could have an influence. So a big question, is Bitcoin also a form of decentralized finance? In the Bitcoin protocol, peers interact with each other directly without any intermediary, except of course for the Bitcoin blockchain, which is governed by mathematics and by its miners. So, yep, sure. Also, Bitcoin is a form of decentralized finance, and it's just about doing transactions and payments. This technology has come with some dark aspects. We can refer to it as the dark side of the technology. You might be familiar with the famous actors or characters in Star Wars. the temptation is very strong with DeFi. The famous citation here, or actually question whether the dark side is more powerful or not, has been answered by Yoda with no, no, no. It is quicker, easier, and more seductive. That's true for DeFi as well. Consider the standard business model of somebody investing 2 to 3 years of hard work, having to overcome some regulatory hurdles and earn capital in order to build a business. Afterwards, the business is hopefully profitable and he can invest even more hard work, and needs a little luck to grow it into an enterprise in order to someday retire and live from the business he has built. Versus the opportunity which just appeared with DeFi and all these decentralized business models, which are based on human nature, where you just need a little luck, where you need some others to be more stupid and risk something. Actually, what you're not told is that it's a huge risk of potentially total losses. Nonetheless, overcoming all these hurdles means you get rich quickly. So that is actually the dark side, which lures a lot of players into using the new technology to join the game. And frankly speaking, I remember the time of the early ICO time. It turned into a bubble which finally burst. It started as a great idea to get projects funded. I was there when Ethereum started, and that kind of business model wouldn't be allowed anymore. But it worked. It was perfect. It was really meant for getting something kickstarted, which would otherwise not have been funded. And afterwards came many more. And with these many more, kind of a fear of missing out started. Tokens increased in value. Bubble was more and more inflated, and finally the bubble bursted. And that's actually what is totally possible and with with big likelihood will be repeated these days with DeFi. It started all as a great idea to do peer-to-peer lending, which was one of the earliest business models in what we call today DeFi. And also there, several platforms and decentralized models started to inflate their tokens price. And sooner or later, we will see the same bubble burst. So the question whether or not DeFi is next can most likely be answered with yes. What is the effect of all that? So it's kind of a dire outlook, and most likely it will repeat the same cycle as we saw with the ICO bubble. So fraud is inevitable. I've recently browsed through a list of deceased coins, and 99% of those were scams. So there will be some fraud. There already is some. There will be bugs in these protocols, although they have been better coded and better reviewed than the old ICO contracts. Nonetheless, where there is a lot of money, there is the potential of hacks. And sooner or later, as I said before, the bubble will burst, leading people to lose money. And the result of that is, of course, a negative perception of the technology, as happened in the ICO era, which means a lot of businesses will likely be reluctant to join the new technology and adopt it, which is a drawback for the entire adoption of the industry. Nonetheless, the even worse outcome is that there will be more regulatory oversight than today, which means regulatory constraints on startups, and then having fewer players who can afford meeting all these constraints and meeting and coping with regulatory hurdles. Today, we already see that a couple of such players try to get a banking license, which is not for free, of course. There's an entry barrier of several millions, meaning that only big companies who did already have that success or have that kind of funding get access and access to that market. That's one of the downsides. And then there is another, even worse downside, which has nothing to do with regulation, but just with technology, which is about having high transaction fees. You might be familiar with the term gas in relation or in connection with Ethereum. Ethereum has been built on a slightly different protocol idea than Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, all transactions are kind of similar. So they don't spend a lot of data on the blockchain itself and don't spend a lot of CPU capacity when being calculated. Ethereum is a variable. Every transaction can be different. So the early developers introduced a parameter they called gas, which means every computational instruction burns some amount of CPU power when being mined. And the more complex these computations are, the more CPU power is needed, of course, and the more fuel needs to be burned. That's referred to as gas. And there is only limited gas in a single block. There is a limited amount of blocks being generated, which means there's only a limited number of transactions that can be processed in a given time span. The more players try to get into such a chain and into such a block, the higher the bidding, the higher the gas price. This has led to small projects and projects which need lower gas prices in order to function, in order to be competitive and economically feasible, to be squeezed out of the Ethereum blockchain altogether. Imagine a game running on blockchain, which would be entirely possible and would have been no problem at all at the very beginning when gas prices were down to fractions of cents. Those projects are just not possible anymore. Just for comparison, today's gas prices mean that a single transaction, sending tokens from one wallet to another wallet, can be as high or cost as much as $20 to $30 per transaction, irrespective of the amount which is being transacted. You can imagine that these high transaction fees, referred to as gas costs or gas prices, they are not affordable by small projects which are either non-profit or just run on a different economic scale. So they are squeezed out from the blockchain altogether. It can be summarized as having an additional burden, like financial constraints on startups. And again, we have fewer players. And what does that mean, having fewer players? That means we are going back to centralization again. So the original idea of blockchain, with having as many players as possible, running nodes, running miners, running independent businesses, which just communicate through the blockchain, this idea is converted into its opposite, meaning that the current hype, the current craze around DeFi forces these players off the main chain, off the mainnet, and therefore leading to some form of centralization again. So what is the outlook? At the moment, of course, there is still the hype, which means that, again, in the same manner as we witnessed it during the ICO time, a lot of people are looking at blockchain as a form to get rich quickly, meaning that only rich players and players with a large budget can afford to stay in the game. Nonetheless, every time there has been some constraint, some form of pain, there has always been the attempt, and successful attempt, of course, to escape that pain. And one of these pains, especially the really painful case of having high transaction fees and having limited scalability, will lead to projects and ideas and technologies to avoid it and to get higher scalability. So this bottleneck will finally be removed. We have already a couple of technologies on the market which are ready right now and which will soon take over. So there's the technology of sharding, which could be one of the technologies avoiding it on the Ethereum mainnet. The same with proof of stake. Then, of course, there is a project called Polkadot allowing the connection and the connection of different blockchains and thereby running parallel chains, which also allows to scale. So methods which simply avoid the most pressing and most hurtful bottleneck at the moment will take over in the near future. Then the meta of regulation means that we will see a shift from the pure money-making schemes to real business use cases. It's a fact that regulators simply don't like businesses and players and speculators to avoid regulatory oversight. So the constraints will get tougher and tougher. I just read an article in the Mirror that in Britain there has been a ban on all use cases involving Bitcoin, simply by lacking means to ban Bitcoin because it's an international decentralized project. So that's the biggest advantage of blockchain projects altogether. They took the next possible thing, which is banning its use. So banning its use does not mean banning the blockchain. So as a result, using blockchain for different things than just speculation and money making will be the logical consequence. And then, of course, as a result, from failures of protocols, bugs, hacks, and so forth, we will see an increased maturity, which means standardized protocols. We will have standardized suppliers and some forms of certification which prove that suppliers are reliable and safe. There will be fail-safes and finally some insurances. Insurances are most likely the last to move into blockchain businesses, at least affordable insurances. There are already some on proven businesses, but everything which is new, and again, in this case, hurtful for new and startup players, is still extremely expensive. So as a startup, either you run a huge risk of losing everything by not being insured, or you have to afford the high insurance fees. So getting standardization and maturity into blockchain processes means that startups are not left out of that chain and they can still profit from that. Well, that is all in a nutshell. So at the moment, we face just a new era of speculation, hype, and craze. The reality of this is not that blockchain is taking over and is very successful, but quite the opposite. It leads to a centralization again. But as an outcome from the inevitable bubble burst, we will see an improvement of the situation and again the next level of maturity. See it like a big bushfire. So after the fire has been extinguished, there are new blossoms again and a new era of prosperity. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
So thank you very much, Hannes. We do have a few questions from the audience. If you're interested in contributing or asking anything, just click on the Q&A button with the question mark on the left side of your screen and ask away. So first up, is all DeFi bad? And if not, how would you describe the light side of DeFi?
Good question. Thanks. Well, not all DeFi is bad. It's about the money-making scheme, which is the bad attribute to DeFi or certain DeFi models. So models which are just about getting rich quick could be deemed as a dark side or being on the dark side, whereas those who are not motivated by quick monetary gain, I would deem as being on the light side in this comparison. So also the old models of using the blockchain to get funding, like what I mentioned. So the Ethereum ICO, which was the first one. Well, okay, to be honest, it was the second one. Mastercoin was the first, but Ethereum was the first big one. That was a good thing. Ethereum wouldn't have hatched, and well, we wouldn't be in the current situation, right? So that's a good thing. Using it to share data or share access to resources, that's a good thing. Using it as a protocol layer for audits, that's a good thing. Everything which is about really money making, about money changing, is in most cases rather bad.
Great, thank you. Next question. Do you consider your own enterprise, so Core Ledger, to be part of DeFi?
In some senses, of course, Core Ledger is part of DeFi. It runs on blockchain, so everything which we do, documentation on blockchain, can be considered part of DeFi. It's only partially related to financial models. So Core Ledger allows to do or to run business processes altogether which don't need to be financial in nature. So, for example, Ambitorio is about documenting things or sharing documents and using the token as access token to encrypt the documents. So it has nothing to do with financial use cases. But most of use cases which run on Core Ledger are financial in nature. So yes, we are part of DeFi as well.
Okay. Next question. You mentioned regulators toward the end of your talk. Do you expect regulators to make DeFi impossible altogether in the future?
Let's say the way of getting rich quick models that will most likely be regulated so intensely that people will be barred from accessing it, or let's say barred from launching such models. Due to the nature of blockchain, you can't close all or entry points or exit points, but the connection between the tokens which live on blockchain and under quotes real assets, which in most cases mean fiat money, euros, Swiss francs, British pounds, whatever, US dollars, that can be those gateways can be closed, and most likely they will. So what I expect is more. The regulation is already kind of tough, but even tougher regulation. Meaning that as a business offering entry points to any kind of DeFi solution, you need a license which will cost you per so once per obtaining it, and then of course monthly or annually in getting audited and so forth. So by simply raising the bars, that will already be an entry barrier, which is considerable. As I already said, in the UK, they already increased the entry barriers quite dramatically, but just this forbidding business models with Bitcoin. So I expect this to happen everywhere else too.
The next question is about a specific technology, Uniswap, and how it fits into the DeFi landscape.
Well, Uniswap allows to trade tokens one against another, and it is fueled by a very clever mathematical model. It has advantages and disadvantages. One of them is, of course, it's a very nice implementation of a decentralized exchange. The other one, of course, is that it allows to wildly speculate, and it has already shown the classical dark side, because there is money to be made by creating a token that is needed to pay for that service, which led players to copy it. So what was the name of that? SushiSwap was a copy of Uniswap, and then SushiSwap was again copied by somebody else. I don't know. So already a couple of offsprings were created with, again, hundreds of millions or even billions in investment money flowing to it. The idea is nice. The outcome, well, reminds a little bit of the DAO.
All right. So that's all the questions we have for today. I'm going to thank everyone again for joining us. If you do have any more questions, or if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so very easily through our website, and we would love to hear from you. As always, we're on social media at LinkedIn, Twitter, and also at Medium, where you'll find monthly articles on topics of blockchain and tokenization, and most recently, DeFi. We're also on YouTube, which is where you'll find a recording of this webinar in case you want to refer back, as well as our past webinars. So that's all from our side for today. Thank you again for participating, and we do hope to see you at the next webinar.